Hey everyone, Night Haru here. So today we're going to go over all those things that we haven't gone over in past videos. So I've done quite a few gear videos, just kind of explaining what the meta is, how it's determined. Then I've done some specific videos on which sets you want to actually be wearing in given situations. But today I want to talk about some things that are, hopefully will be pretty helpful for you guys because these are things that really don't change, or at least don't change very much. And they're also the same for all tanks. So it doesn't matter what tank class you're on. This video is going to apply to you. So what we want to go over is food, potions, attribute points, Mundus Stones, what race you want to play, weapons, jewelry, and armor traits, and enchantments, and then also resistances very briefly. So I just want to start off, if you're brand new and you just want to know like what to do, or if you just don't care about the why, most of my videos are geared towards the why. So I want to, explain to you how to do stuff so you can kind of make decisions for yourself, and that way you don't always have to be coming and looking for a build guide. And I don't generally do build guides where everything's all packaged together and it's like, okay, you're having 49 points in health here and then you put the rest in stamina except for 5 in magicka, whatever. I don't do those kind of videos, and I've explained why in the past, but I'll just say it again here briefly because I think some people are either confused or don't know just because they haven't seen some of my other videos. So my idea or my thought process on most tanks, what gear you're wearing, it doesn't matter based on your class. It doesn't matter. You're not trying to use it to determine, what your stats are going to be or whatever. You're wearing gear that buffs the group in general, or that will keep you alive. And that's the only decision-making process you need. You wear DPS increasing sets if you can, and if not, you wear survival sets. The same thing with your skills. You use all the skills you can to buff the group, and then you use the ones you need to keep yourself alive. And that's really it. And those things should change depending on what kind of content you're running. And so having like a build guide where you're like, okay, use these 5 skills, sure, that's okay. And it works in a lot of situations, and especially in formats and stuff like that. But I just don't think that will be as useful for most of you out there. So that's why I do things a little bit different. I don't do build guides. I just try to explain what the skills are, where they can be used, specific situations, and then you guys can go out and make your own decisions. Hopefully after you've watched one of my videos, maybe you have to watch it, a couple of times, but you'll know everything I know, at least about these skills. And while I don't know everything, I talk to a lot of people that are smarter than I am, or that know more about the game than I do, and try to give you guys the best advice. So anyways, preamble out of the way. Sorry, that was a bit long. So this basic setup that I want to talk about here, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to tell you what my best advice is, and then we're going to talk more in depth and talk about other options. So for food, use sugar skulls. In 99% of situations, sugar skulls are going to be totally fine. For potions, you want to use Tristat. So they're called Essence of Health. The problem with Essence of Health is that there's trash bots that only give you health back that are also called the same thing. So be careful when you're at a guild trader. Make sure that the Essence of Health that you're buying is one that gives mag, stam, and health. And then for attributes, put all your points in health. That's all you got to do. Mundus Stone, Atronach. Race, best in slot is Imperial. If you don't have Imperial, Redguard or Nord are both fine. You can kind of pick which one you like. You don't need the resistances on a Nord. I'll just point that out. Armor traits. Sorry, I'm not supposed to be talking about this stuff now. I'm just going through the list. Okay, armor traits. I would recommend everything sturdy unless you've got, 100K to spend, in which case go with infused on the head, chest, and legs, and then use tri-stack glyphs on those 3 pieces. That'll give you, mag, stam, and health. Otherwise, again, just go all sturdy, and then you can kind of mix and match your glyphs that you're using on those so that everything's kind of balanced out. You want your stamina to be generally your highest attribute. For weapons, you want to go infused on both of them. On your back bar, you're going to have a crusher enchant for your 2-handed weapon, and then for your 1-handed weapon, you're probably going to go with like a fire enchant so you can proc and Kratos. If not, any enchant that sounds good to you. There's some that give you a small shield. There's some that will drain stamina or magicka from the target and give it to you. So that's kind of nice. For jewelry, go all infused. And then for enchants, reduce prismatic skill cost. Now onto resistances. Resistances are something that I see a lot of people not understand. So again, the short version here at the beginning is you don't need to worry about it. You never need to worry about your resistances. You never need to look at them. just ignore it. It's going to be fine. As long as you're doing roughly the things you should be doing, your resistances are going to be fine. All right, so that's the short advice. Now let's go ahead and actually talk about each one of these things and talk about some other options and other stuff you could do. So for food, let's start with there. So sugar skulls, like I said, you can use in 99% of situations. Really, you can use them pretty much anywhere with the exception of maybe, I don't know, if you're getting really sweaty with Cloud Rest, maybe some other places. I don't know. I'm trying to think of another situation and I can't really think of one. But sugar shoals are generally good. A couple of other options, if you are in a situation where you're using a lot of mag or using a lot of stamina, you could go with basically just DPS, the best in slot for DPS. Cheap ones are, but they still have 90% of the same effect as the gold food, but purple food you could go with is Witch Mother's Potent Brew and then Dubious Cameron Throne for stamina. Dubious Cameron Throne is often used in Cloud Rest if you're tanking the Griffins. So you have to dodge roll quite a bit, and you're looking for more stam recovery. So switching to Dubious Cameron Throne there can be useful. The other place, again, Cloud Rest is kind of the exception to everything. You could go with a food that gives max stam and magicka and no health for execute on Zamaja. There's a radish salad. There is some falafel, a couple other ones. Those don't give health, and that's why you don't want it because of Baneful. Moving on to attribute points. So I still stick by what I said. You can put everything in health and just kind of ignore it. The only exception or only caveat that I would say to that is that generally you want more stamina than magicka. And the reason for that is there are undaunted passives that give you more of your primary resource, and your primary resource is determined by whichever one you have the most of. So if you're somehow you're close, if you're wearing like Worm Colt or something like that, you can have an extra mag enchants. So changing your enchants, if you've got some mag, some stam, that's an easy way to do it. Another way is to refund a few of these points and to move them over into stamina or magicka so that you have that. I will point out that there are situations. So once I respect a stand-in into a tank just because I needed one, and I was like, what, this guy's got enough stuff leveled. I just want to try it out. And I did that, and I found that I had all the stamina I needed, and I never had enough magicka. So I actually changed my skill points around so that I would have more magicka, so that when I used the synergy, I would get back more mag. And that might be the case for you if you have an off-meta tank race, or certain classes. Sorks tend to have more magicka, I believe, and there might be others. I don't really play a Templar. I mean, I made one, and I've played around with it, but nobody will let me in real content with it because I'm kind of bait on it. So here nor there, I guess. But I'm moving on to Mundus Stones. So the Atronach will give you magicka recovery, and that's generally why you want that. Generally, as a tank, you want magicka recovery. You could also choose, I believe it's like the Serpent that gives the stamina version. Again, for the same reasons I mentioned earlier, if you're playing like a non-meta setup, a non-meta race or spec, or doing something weird where you're like a hybrid, you might want to choose a different Mundus, but in general, the Atro is what everybody goes with. The Lady Mundus gives resistances, and the reason you don't want to choose that is because you're just not going to need it. You're already going to be at resistance cap or close to it, and then if you need to get to the cap or even a little bit over it, there's a way to do that, and I'll explain that at the end. The second optional one here that actually is decent is the Lord. It gives max health, although generally for the same reason that you wouldn't choose the Lady, you wouldn't choose the Lord, because you just don't need the extra health. Generally, you want your health between like 40k and 45k. You can maybe want it a little bit higher, maybe 47 on certain really hard-hitting bosses. It's kind of like, yeah, I'll take it as high as it can go, but you don't need to build for it. It'll just come if you do other things, having those tri-stat, enchants, things like that. And then the last one that actually is pretty interesting is the Steed. So the Steed gives you a speed boost and also health recovery. Now this is mainly used in Cloud Rest because you have to run from point A to point B with Zamaja, and sometimes that can be hard, especially with the change to heavy armor and sprinting. You're really slow whenever you're sprinting. So the extra 10% speed there can really help, and you don't have to be sprinting when you're doing that. It's just a 10% speed buff. So that's nice. And then the health recovery is also nice because while you do get a healing debuff in Cloud Rest, my understanding, and I'm pretty sure on this, is that your health recovery is not affected at all. And so, having the extra health recovery actually is more beneficial than healing would otherwise be, since you're getting a huge debuff when you're in Baneful. Now, moving on to armor traits and enchantments. So I'm going to do both, I'm going to do the traits and enchantments at the same time because they kind of go together. So I'll start off with armor traits. As I mentioned, if you just want to go sturdy with everything, that's totally fine. And I did that for the longest time, and there's really nothing wrong with that. If you want to kind of min-max and you've got the gold to burn, then what you might want to do is do infused on the larger pieces. For whatever reason, this doesn't make any sense to me, but ESO has chosen certain pieces to be, I don't know, we call them larger, but they give you a bigger benefit, both in resistances natively to the armor. So if you just look at the resistances, it'll be higher on your head, chest, and legs. And then if you look at your like belt or a shoulder or gloves or something like that, you'll see that they're lower. And this is also, it's kind of weird and it's kind of confusing. I wish they would change it and make it more clear for new people. But if you're using an enchant and it says it'll give you, 8,000 magicka, and then you put it on a belt, it's going to give you like 2,000 or 3,000. It's going to give you a lot less. And it's because it's a smaller item. And it doesn't tell you, and you don't know that until you use it. But your head, chest, and legs are all three kind of the largest. So if you do infused on those, and then you do the tri-stat enchants, you'll get the biggest benefit out of that. You could do tri-stats on everything. I've seen people do that and seen people recommend it. Yeah, you can. It's really expensive and you're really getting diminishing returns. And I actually kind of wonder, since if you look at if you look at a large piece like your chest and it's sturdy, you get 4% block mitigation. If you have the same thing on your belt, it also gives you 4% block mitigation. So it doesn't matter what piece you put that on, you still get 4%. However, with the infused and the enchants, you're going to get a bigger benefit on the chest than you would if you put that on your belt. Splitting hairs here, but I would just go with sturdy on just about everything. Other options, reinforced and Nirnhoned. Those are both kind of traps. You don't need the extra resistances in PvE, so I wouldn't recommend them. Other things you can do that actually are decent. One is well fitted. There are certain fights, and as you get a little bit better and more experience, you'll find yourself blocking a lot less and dodge rolling heavies a lot more. There are some fights where you really need to dodge roll a lot of the attacks. Otherwise, you get dangerously close to dying or might die. And so having something well fitted instead of sturdy could be beneficial in that situation. But again, when you first start out, you're holding block a lot. And so sturdy just makes a lot of sense to me. And then the last armor trait that's kind of interesting is Divines. So if you're in like VAS, Veteran Asylum Sanctorum, and you're off tanking and you're constantly having to stack the adds, a lot of times you want a speed boost, and you might do something like Wild Hunt or a lot of other things, but the Steed is one of your options that you could go with. And if you have all Divines on, it increases your speed by even more. Also, by having all Divines on your armor, it kind of allows you to have one set of armor, and then you can change what your Mundus is based on what you need a little bit. And so you don't have to make maybe multiple sets. And so that's why. But it's an option. I just want you to know about it, and that it's not a terrible idea. It is something you can definitely do. And typically the reason you would do that is because there was not a better option, or you just didn't need whatever the other options were. So if you didn't need block mitigation, if you didn't need the dodge roll, then you might go with Divines. And another thing that is a little bit confusing about armor. Armor is everything you would think of, your gauntlets, your chest, helmet, all that good stuff. It also counts your shield. It does not count your jewelry or your weapons. Jewelry and weapons are each their own category. And I think that can be a little bit confusing. So let's move on and go ahead and talk about weapons here. So with your weapons, again, I would recommend just doing infused. And the reason that you want to go with infused on your weapons and jewelry is because your enchants often is the thing that makes or breaks those things. And so having infused just increases those, how effective those enchants are. And also, if you need to change, if you decide, okay, I want a different enchantment, some new enchantment comes out, or it's for a particular piece of content, you can just change your enchantment. It's relatively cheap, and you don't have to recraft jewelry, which is obviously can be very expensive, whether in transmutes or in, golding stuff out. So other options that work pretty well for weapons traits are charged. Charged you would generally use if you're doing a brittle build, and so you're expected to brittle because you want to make sure you apply the status effect. It can be a little bit confusing what charged mean, because I think it says like a 200% increase in applying a status effect. The chances of applying status effects are actually quite low. So for weapons, I would have to look it up. I don't recall, but probably 10%, maybe a little bit lower. So it increasing by 200%, it's still a lower chance. And it could be 5 or something like that. I think the highest chance of applying a status effect base is like 20%. Another one up here, defending. Defending is again, it's another trap, you know. Resistances, at least in the current meta, you just don't need them. If you do your normal build and you're wearing heavy armor, you're going to have more than enough resistances. And so there's no reason to go with defending. The last one I would mention is decisive. Now there could be a use for this, or there are uses for this, basically to get more ultimate generated. So whenever you generate ultimate, you can generate a little bit more with a decisive weapon. However, those are kind of niche builds and not something that I would recommend to just everyone, but it is interesting. So, you know, something to be aware of. Moving on to jewelry traits. Now, before I talk about the individual traits, I just want to mention something. So when you recraft an item, when you recreate it using transmutes, you always recreate it in the lowest quality that item drops in. So what I mean by that is that if you are recrafting an overland sets drop in green, blue, and purple. However, green is the lowest quality. So if you ever recraft a overland set, it will recraft in green quality. Now, where that changes and where it becomes interesting is that perfected jewelry only drops in gold. And it only drops in the last boss in any given trial. So it has to be trial gear that you're looking for. But if you get like perfected, Saxley or perfected Yolnagrin jewelry, you can recraft it using only transmutes and it will be gold. And that will save you a ton of money, millions of gold. So what I personally have done, and I would honestly recommend this, depending on your group. Some groups are like, you know what, you got to show up in golded gear, even though you don't need it, even though it's overkill. But run vet trials. You know, when you get to hard modes, you need golded out. You should have golded out gear. You know, you're just trying to show everybody that you're bringing your best and that you care because this is hard content. But whenever you're running just regular vets, I used to run them in blues. Don't do that, but I used to run them in blues all the time, and I wasn't dying, and I was giving all the buffs to my group. And if you're wondering about that or how that works, the first video I did, I mentioned that in there, as well as like how to front bar, back bar sets and use like Bloodlords and other things like that when you're new. But you could go check that out. I'll leave a link below. But my point is that you can get by with purple jewelry for a long time, and then once you get to perfected, then you can recraft it in transmutes using just transmutes, and then you can do the infused or whatever, and it's a lot cheaper, and you're not spending millions of gold. And I mean, when you're new, like at least like me, I couldn't afford that, so I wasn't going to be golding anything out anyways. So it was nice to just know and to be able to go, get the perfected rings jewelry to drop and then just recraft it using transmutes. So the reason that we use infused is, like I mentioned, is increases the enchants, and your enchants on your jewelry is what really makes or breaks them. So our enchants that we're going to generally use, at least as far as what I would recommend, are going to be reduced prismatic cost. This is a new enchant that hasn't been out for very long, and it reduces the cost of everything. I have rabbits, and one of them's chewing on something, so I need to go check on that. All right, it's not the green screen, so that's good news. Where was I? Yeah, reduce prismatic skill cost. This is what I would recommend. Ideally, you're going to be casting a lot of abilities, and to have all of them reduced by this amount, it makes things pretty cheap, and it will really help you not running out of resources. Now, another option you could do, or a couple of things you could swap out or do one or two of, is for enchants, is a bracing enchant. So when you first start out, you're holding block a lot, and so you might throw on one bracing enchant. Now, if you've got all sturdy on your armor, you probably don't need a bracing enchant. So in that case, again, just stick with a reduced prismatic cost. I used to run tri-stat recovery, and that's what I used to recommend. I like the reduced prismatic cost, and I want to thank Natsu. He's the one who recommended that to me, and I don't think a lot of people have really caught on to the fact that reduced prismatic costs are really nice. Another option you could do, again, sticking with infused jewelry, is maybe like a all stam or all magicka recovery. The reason you might want to do that, typically it would be magicka, and when you're an off tank, or sometimes even when you're a main tank, you're just casting a lot of abilities, and your job is to buff and debuff the group, and you don't really need something to stay alive. So if you're mostly casting buffing abilities that use magicka, having all recovery enchants with infused jewelry is probably going to be a little bit better than having the reduced prismatic cost. The reason I recommend the reduced prismatic cost is because it's going to apply to all of your skills and abilities. And so if you have ones that use stam, it's going to help with that. And then the second is I think it works in the most number of situations the best. So while there might be situations where you want to swap out and do stam recovery or mag recovery or something, I think just in general, I think reduced prismatic cost is the best option. Now, other jewelry traits that you could use or honorable mentions or kind of traps. So a couple of traps. Harmony is not really needed anymore. It used to be used in Cloud Rest. If I did my math right, I think it's like a 3,500 heal after all the buffs and debuffs with Baneful. And, you have to be healed up to full when you have Baneful. Is 3,000 or 4,000 health really going to make or break, getting healed up to full? It might, especially if you're in a newer group. So maybe you do still want to run Harmony in that situation. However, I think probably not. And honestly, you're probably going to die before that or die to something else. So, and I think having, more magicka or skills being cheaper so that you can heal yourself more with vigor and with whatever your class heal is probably more advantageous. And if somebody, is very knowledgeable and they disagree with me, go with what they say or try it out for yourself so that you have, some sort of idea. But I just don't really think it's needed. And the other thing up here is, of course, healthy, arcane, and robust. Those are what things basically come in when you first get them. I think it's kind of fine to leave it. Just realize that if you put on Worm Cult or something, you might have a situation that we mentioned earlier where you have more magicka than stamina. If all three of your pieces of Worm Cult or arcane and you've got a bunch of magicka enchants, so that might be something you need to change or do something with. The trap again here is going to be the protected. So protected increases your resistances, and as I mentioned before, they're just not needed. And again, I will explain that at the end of the video, I promise, or towards the end, not at the very end. And they're timestamps, hopefully, so you can see where I'm talking about. The other option is Triune. I know that TC Lee over the Tank Club likes this. I'm not sure, what other in-game people recommend Triune. I think it's, there's nothing bad about it having max stats. I just think for someone who's new, I think it's better to have the reduced cost or infused with tri-stat recovery. So you recover mag, stam, and health. That's just my take. Someone else might disagree, but that's just what I recommend. And then probably the last one here that is actually pretty good is Swift. So Swift jewelry will increase your speed, and that can be very nice in a lot of different situations. In Cloud Rest with Zamaja running from point A to point B, it can be helpful even in 4-mans when everybody's just like sprinting through so you can get ahead and get taunt on something. So if you're doing speed runs, it can be very helpful for that. And there's probably other situations, but it's also just kind of fun and just kind of generally helpful. So I usually keep a couple pieces of Swift jewelry. But again, if you wait until you get some perfected jewelry, you can just recraft it using transmutes, and you can have golded Swift jewelry, and then you can have, you can have multiple sets with infused and triune and just kind of swap them out whenever you want. Now moving on. Oh, actually, we're finally to resistances. So I may have already mentioned, but 33,000 is the soft capped for resistances. You can go above that, however, you don't get any benefit. The only reason that you might want to go above 33,000, besides PvP, is that there are certain mechanics that will reduce your resistances. So Veteran Maw of Lorcage, well, it happens on normal too, but there are adds that will reduce your resistances. They'll shatter your armor, is usually what it's called. And there are a couple of other places they're not coming to mind right now, so I'm sorry. But whenever that happens, if you had resistances above 33k and it reduced it below, you would still get the benefit there. However, you really don't need your resistances that high. So in the current meta, what is going on is that, looking at my tank here, I have not built for resistances at all. I'm not on a Nord, so I don't have any class I don't have any racial passives increasing my resistances. And I'm already at buffed. I'm at like 27k. Now, if you're in a fight where you do want to max out resistances or you're getting hit really hard, probably what you're going to do is use the Master's Sword and Board. And that is typically going to heal you for at least 6,000 health. And how much it heals you for, it also gives you that much in resistances. So if you're at 27,000 resistance, and then you add another 6,000 to that, you're at 33k. So you're already at cap. That's what you would do. You would just put on the Master's Sword and Board bar and then call it a day. The last thing I'll say about resistances is that One thing that is very confusing and is not really explained anywhere, at least that I've seen in game, is that every 660 resistances provides a 1% damage gain or loss. So if you're debuffing the enemy, every 660 resistance that you debuff them, that's going to increase the group's damage by 1%. And likewise on yourself, every 660 resistance that you have increases your damage reduction by 1%. So at 33K, you're at 50% damage reduction at 33,000. So anyways, hopefully that makes sense. If anybody has any questions about that, feel free to hit me up down below. And that's it for this video, guys. I hope this was helpful. It's kind of a short video. I think all this stuff applies to all classes, and I think most of these things honestly don't make that big of a difference. Sure, there's like a best option, but usually it's pretty clear which one is best, and it's only kind of situational. And also, if you don't switch to whatever's best in a given situation, I think just, the original thing that I mentioned will get you 99% of the way there. And honestly, will get you through probably all the content you want to get through, at least until hard modes. And by the time you get to hard modes, honestly, you probably don't need my advice. You'll know what works for you. You'll know, how things feel, or you can try them out for yourself and make those decisions for yourself. I've forgotten to do this in the past, but if you find this helpful and you think it might help other people, please share it with them. Drop it in a Discord. Please don't spam anybody's Discord with my videos, especially if they don't want them there. But if you're on a good relationship with people and they have questions and you think my videos would be helpful, please link them. I would really appreciate that. But yeah, anyways, that's it for this video, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.